Mr. Derek Veenhoff.
He's better known as
Deek.
Drinking liquor with DJ Deek, we out laughing.
Yo, Deek.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is episode 85. We're here with Mick West. Once again, Mick, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here again.
Yeah. And Mick is the, of course, if you listen to our other episode with Mick, you remember that he was a co-founder of Neversoft that actually created the Tony Hawk Pro Skater series video games, as well as Guitar Hero. You got the skateboard there in the background.
That's right.
And but of course, Mick retired from game programming, and then he got really into debunking the paranormal, UFOs, pseudoscience with metabunk.org, which is his website. And Mick released a book a couple years ago now that is Escape from the Rabbit Hole. And he also has a podcast now called Tales from the Rabbit Hole. Mick, how has the book and the podcast been received, and what are some of the biggest insights that you've gathered so far?
Well, it's pretty good. If you look at the Amazon rankings, there it's kind of divided. There's like a bunch of 4 and 5 star reviews, and then there's a bunch of 1-star reviews from the people who don't like what I'm saying. It's not so much that they don't like, the way the book is written and stuff. They just don't think that I'm on the up and up. So, a problem I've always had for years now is people think I'm some kind of, government shill. Yeah. And so it's difficult to get across to people if they start out with that belief. So really the book's more kind of aimed at people who have a friend who is down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And it's been pretty well received from those people. If there are people who want to understand more about these various conspiracy theories and understand about, why people fall for them and why they stay down there and what you can do to help them out. And the podcast is really just kind of an extension of that.
Yeah, so it's not a direct confrontation to people who might believe these types of things, but it's more speaking to those who have people like that in their lives, or like you said, to help them to understand it. Have you ever found success confronting people directly about this kind of stuff? This is the thing you hear with this discussion that as far as vaccines, for example, and that kind of thing, it's seemingly more important to talk to the people that are on the fence about things or that are around the discussion, but that not directly are anti-vaccine and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think whenever someone is kind of going through this type of thing, a belief in conspiracy theories, they go through a kind of a trajectory where they're going up and getting more and more deep into it, down. Well, so I guess they'd be down the rabbit hole, but they're getting deeper and deeper into it. So it's whilst they're in this initial phase of kind of learning more stuff and getting into it and promoting it and things like that, not a lot you're going to do is really going to make much difference, or at least it's not going to seem to make much difference. But everyone who goes through it and gets out of it, which is a lot of people. A lot of people will eventually get out of it, if not the majority of them. There's usually a fairly specific turning point. And it usually revolves around one fairly simple thing. They realize that one thing was wrong, and then they start to question like what else might be wrong. If they actually accept this thing, this thing is definitely wrong. Like with the QAnon thing, there was an interview, I think on the BBC or CNN perhaps, with a guy who used to be in QAnon, and he said that the thing that kind of made the difference was someone showed him that one thing that he thought was true about Q was false. And the thing was that there was a prediction that Donald Trump would say tippy top at some point. And then Donald Trump did say tippy top. And everyone took this to be a sign that, Q is infallible and is playing 4-dimensional chess and there's a direct line to Donald Trump. But the thing was, the prediction was actually to say it during the State of the Union address, and he didn't. And also, Donald Trump says tippy top all the time. It's one of his favorite phrases. You can go back and you can look at all these videos of him saying that. So for this guy, just telling him this one thing was the tipping point. But that doesn't mean if you tell any Q person that one thing, it's going to make any difference.
Yeah.
He just happened to be at the right spot in his trajectory where that was something that he would pivot on. all the things that were told to him up to that point, I think, did help to a degree by kind of keeping him more grounded in reality and giving him useful information to work with. But you won't see results most of the time. But at some point, there will be a result.
Yeah, and now, of course, that Joe Biden has been sworn in as president, you actually see some videos. I don't know how many of them are real or fake of
Hmm.
QAnon supporters that are saying they're almost crying. Some of them saying, have I been duped and all this. I've seen multiple videos like that of people saying, what if we were wrong? And I guess we're wrong, kind of thing. Do we know from the QAnon people? Are they still on board? Is the storm still coming somehow?
Well, it's kind of a split, really,
Yeah.
and like this is what happens with any kind of prophecy-based conspiracy theory or cult, is that at some point they have to count the chickens, and they don't get the prophecy they were ending up with. And so you kind of get like two or three different reactions to that. You're going to get people who just say, "Oh well, we just didn't understand it," or maybe we changed it ourselves by doing this, and so now there's a new plan, and so we'll go with a new plan, and they just carry on with whatever they see as being the new plan, and then they see the failure of that gets folded into the explanation, and all becomes part of this wonderful explanation. And then there are people who will take it as being, "Oh, what the heck? That was wrong. I believed that was to be true, and everything I knew was wrong, and maybe I should reevaluate this, and maybe I should kind of move away from this, and should I check other things that I believed?" And then you get people that are kind of in the middle, and they're just like, yeah, and they just think, well, maybe it wasn't quite what it was made out to be, but I'm still kind of
Yeah.
suspicious. And then
Yeah,
they
like, it's
just,
still nefarious, there's still something going on, but I'm not exactly
yeah,
sure what it is, but, I just know that Biden's a bad guy because
yeah,
of all the
yeah.
stuff I
So
hear.
yeah, so yeah, you can't say like what's going to happen to the Q people because they're all different, and
Yeah.
they all have different levels of involvement, and they all have different levels of where they are in their trajectory. That because it's such a big shake to the system, though, that's going to shake a lot of leaves out of the tree. But some people are going to cling on to it.
Yeah, so, of course, we've had COVID-19, we have the election being a fraud, according to Trump and
Hmm.
others, so, how do you describe or how have you been thinking about, conspiracy theory as it relates to those things, and are things getting worse or are things staying the same as far as the amount of people that believe these
Well,
types of conspiracies?
I think it's kind of like we're in a new situation here. Because if you look at you compare things like specifically the election fraud claims, the election fraud conspiracy theory, this is something that has been pushed by Donald Trump and the people around him as if it's fact for months, for many months. I mean, really starting back when 4+ years ago when he was campaigning to get the nomination. He's always been saying that the elections are rigged and things like that, and so his supporters believe him. And we haven't really had a situation like that with what the other conspiracy theories like, chemtrails and 9/11 and JFK and, historical conspiracy theories. But now we've got something that's been aggressively pushed by the president, our former president now, thank God, and the people around him as if it's being fact. And so you get millions of people who genuinely believe it. I mean, they think, why would the president lie? He's this great guy, so it must be true. And so you've got many, many more people believing this, and they feel like they have way more justification for believing it than the other conspiracy theories like moon landing hoaxes and things like that, which somewhat bereft of evidence and bereft of high level figures telling you that it's true. So it's kind of a new world, and I think needs kind of different and more intensive debunking attempts.
Yeah, well, the election stuff in particular, because it is so, like you just said, that whether it's UFO, 9/11, some of these things are more out there, but having mail fraud or what they call, depending who you ask, they call it ballot collecting or harvesting, right?
Yeah,
Harvesting is
ballot
like
harvesting.
a negative word. And then you have
Hmm.
some states have different laws regarding that. So it does get kind of confusing for the average person. So I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's what it is. When you hear the president just say something, it's okay. This is a nice package he's giving us. They must have done their research into this. I don't know enough about it. I kind of think yeah, like
Yeah.
I'm a supporter of him, so I'm going to believe it.
Yeah, and definitely, and the people who bring things up in these kind of show hearings that they had, Giuliani and the other lawyers, and the more out there lawyers like Lynn Wood and
Oh
Sidney
yeah.
Powell, who are kind of like QAnon type people who are positing really ridiculous conspiracy theories to
Well,
do
they
with
even had to
internet.
distance from her at one point because
Yes, yeah, and certainly from Lynn Wood, because I mean they never really were with him. But then Sidney Powell had teamed up with Lynn Wood, so they kind of got that by association. And Lynn Wood is really crazy, or at least he says things which appear to be crazy.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's the stuff that's out there because it's being said by the president. Even the crazy stuff by association starts to seem somewhat plausible. And like you said, it's complicated stuff. So the average person isn't going to go in there and do the statistics or look for the data and things like that. So they'll see a video online and it's got something like, the world's smartest man proves conspiracy theories. And you got this guy called Dr. Shiva, and then there's another guy called Solomon. And they say, I'm a mathematician or a data analyst or whatever, and then they look at some spreadsheets and say, look at this number here. This number shouldn't be 12; it should be like 2. And the person watching the video has no idea what the math is behind it, if it's correct or not, which it generally isn't. And so they just say, oh well, here's a guy proving that there's fraud, and so they go with that because it matches what Trump has been telling them. And so you've still got millions of people who think there is absolute proof of election fraud when there really isn't.
Yeah, is this an obvious point that all this has to do with social media and the way that information is just so fast now? Like when I think of the example you just said, somebody watching a video, uh, they don't have time to research this stuff
Hmm.
because the next point of news is up in 5 minutes. And back in the day, it was just, the major networks that were, things would get approved that usually had to be true or true enough that would come to your television screen or your radio. But nowadays, it's independent
Yeah.
filmmakers and independent Twitter accounts and that kind of thing, and it
Yeah, and there's
starts
a
in
couple
that
of
way.
things there. There's the diversity of sources that you listed, like you get all these different filmmakers, but there's also the speed at which things can get out and the speed at which you can access this information. Like if you think back like a really long time ago, before radio, there was no way of hearing something. So if somebody said like this guy said something, there's no way you could hear the sound of his voice. You just have to rely on the written word, which will be transmitted via telegraph across the country. And so each time you get some kind of technological improvement, like radio or even recordings of voices, it's people things are getting to you faster, and they're getting to you in a way that you perhaps didn't experience before. So then you get like television, so you get to see people. And then you got the cable news cycle, the 24-hour cable news cycle, where you get constant news coming in. And now you've got things like Twitter, where if something's happening, the news starts hitting Twitter within minutes sometimes. And sometimes you're even seeing things playing out live, like with the storming of the Capitol. There was lots and lots of different video feeds of people who were actually there, and so you could see it happening in real time, which is something that you couldn't really see before. And you get commentary happening in real time, so people can be starting to spin the conspiracy theories while something's actually happening, or even while it's just about to happen, like before people stormed the Capitol, people could be making conspiracy theories about why they were going to storm the Capitol. So the speed of things creates this kind of feedback loop, which not only gets things into your head quicker, but it also allows them to kind of refine the conspiracy theories, and whatever works best will spread the fastest. And so the rumors that spread the fastest is kind of like a natural selection thing. The
Yeah.
ones that don't work, the ones that don't spark your attention, just fall away, and you're left with whatever the strongest one is, and the strong conspiracy theories survive.
Yeah, speaking of natural selection, just made me think that like evolutionarily, there must be, I'm just guessing, something that we're wired to believe things that our trusted people around us are telling us. Like I would imagine that skepticism is something that developed with the
Hmm.
rational mind over time. Um, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, it just seems,
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
like back in the day, whatever your tribe would tell you something, why would they lie to
mhm.
you, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. You mean you're kind of, I think, primed to trust the people who are your friends and your tribe, the people directly around you, and your brain is kind of evolved to kind of trust a small number of people, but be wary of things that are beyond that. So when a stranger comes, like a stranger kind of triggers like concern because it's someone you've not seen before. And especially if they look different to you, that could be another thing as well. Like, obviously you don't, if you're going through the forest and you see a person, it's different from going through a forest and seeing like a tiger. So the more different things are, the more you fear them. And these are just kind of very kind of primitive reactions to the environment that you can't really control. And in some ways, it's just emotional. It's an emotional feeling that wells up. It's not really like you're thinking about this person's a stranger, I shouldn't listen to them. It's just that you tend to react better to people in your tribe. And then we've got this strange thing now where we've got the online social media, and people kind of form tribes in that circle, but they're not really forming them around like people and groups so much as like around ideas.
Yeah, ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's almost like a cult of an idea rather than a cult of a person. And there's lots of similarities with cults, but it's more decentralized and more kind of just about say massive election fraud. It isn't necessarily like I just believe this one person, Trump or whoever, Sidney Powell. It's that you think that massive election fraud happened, and these people are saying things, and they kind of become part of your tribe. But anybody else who says the same thing also becomes part of your tribe. And so you differentiate people based on what they say. And so now me, Mick West, the debunker, I don't think there was massive election fraud. And so I'm outside of the tribe. I'm like a different person, because that's what's important to you, is proving that or not.
Yeah, you also then have people who say, "No, I don't believe in massive election fraud, but I believe in some election fraud, a little bit." But then even when you look into that, it's still not true. Like, there's virtually no election fraud as far as the officials that investigate this stuff have found, as far
Yeah,
as
well,
I've read.
there's always some election fraud, but it's very, very small numbers. Like you look
Yeah.
up how many dead people voted,
Right.
and it's like 2 or something like that. How
Yeah.
many people voted like out of state, in the wrong state, and there's usually a few hundred because people haven't updated their addresses and things like that, and they're not. It's not actually election fraud. It's just like essentially a
Mistake or
record-keeping
something.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
like either they voted in the wrong state because they hadn't established residence in it.
Yeah.
But and even then, even though it could be a few hundred people do that, it doesn't really make any big difference to the results, because it usually goes both ways. And then you get things like clerical errors, like you will get ballots that can't be read, and again that goes both ways, so it kind of evens out. And most of these things don't really favor one candidate
That's
over
the
the
other
other.
point. Yeah. Why would it only favor one
Yeah,
candidate? Yeah.
you really need something that was really well organized to do it. And the thing is, like, it would be almost impossible not to get caught.
Mhm.
But then the believers in the theory think that they have caught them. They think that they've got all this evidence
Yeah.
that for some reason all the courts are ignoring and all the Congress people are ignoring. And
Did you
everyone's
see some of those hearings? Like, did you see some of those where
Oh,
these
yeah,
citizens
yeah.
and a guy, I've had 40 years experience in security and this and that, and this is what I saw. I saw a USB drive and stuff, and it's like
Yeah,
going on for
but
hours, and they're just not actually saying any evidence.
yeah, they don't actually produce any real evidence. Like, they would say things like, "Oh, I looked at this error log and it said like 60% of the ballots were rejected," or something like that. But they don't actually give you the error log, so you can check what's actually going on. And it turns out that this error log was just listing, essentially the same error, which is a configuration error or something every line. It didn't actually relate to the number of ballots that were rejected. And so people take things like really out of context. And you're just seeing like the tip of how they've taken the data and processed it and looked at it from a certain angle and then filtered it out and then pushed things together and then said, "Oh, look, this is evidence," when really it isn't. It's just that they've massaged the data. They've munged, is the computer term, where you take data and you turn it into a different format.
Mm.
So it looks to the the untrained eye, and presumably to their eyes as well, like that there's something going on. And I think if you're really motivated to find irregularities in data, and you're not perhaps that good at doing it, then you could actually honestly think you have found things. You could think you've actually discovered proof of election fraud. It kind of reminds me of physics cranks. There's a type of self-taught scientist that we refer to as a crank, who is someone who comes up with their own theories of something like physics. And the simplest test of if someone is a crank is to see, have they claimed that they've disproved Einstein's theory of general relativity or something like that. And if they had, then yes, they're probably a crank. But they become convinced themselves that they have actually done this thing. So it's not like they're lying to you. And I think a lot of these people that you see on YouTube doing these big spreadsheet analyses and spending hours and hours poring over numbers and looking at them different ways and applying equations to them, they might genuinely believe that they are uncovering election fraud. And in part, it's because they strongly believe from the start that there is election fraud. And so they're just looking, where is it? Where is the evidence? Is this the evidence? Oh, this looks weird. Maybe that's the evidence. Like, this is weird too. So I'm going to say that's the evidence. But they don't entirely understand it. But because it validates what they're thinking, that they're uncovering some kind of evil communist plot, they go with it.
Right, and they may not be lying, but they're just mistaken, or they have their data incorrect.
Yeah.
A lot of it was blatantly contradictory, though. When people were claiming that we were able to get close enough to the ballots to see that there was fraud, yet they were not allowing us to get close to the ballots. So we sued for them to allow to stand closer, right? Which literally those two things do not congru in reality.
Well, that might have been different people making the claims,
Perhaps.
Obviously there's a lot of people there, and again, you could see the people who are there, the ones that were banging on the windows and shouting at people. They believed that fraud was taking place because they'd been told in no uncertain terms by Donald Trump, essentially, that the Democrats were trying to steal the election, and so they were going down there to try and stop the vote or whatever, or to examine the vote, and they thought that they were they thought that the people that they were shouting at were evil people who was trying to steal the election. So in a way, you could say their heart was in the right place, because they thought that a crime was being committed.
Yeah.
And so they were trying to stop it, but they unfortunately were misled and mistaken.
Yeah. One thing that really pushed a lot of people, I think, to believe this Biden crime family concept was the Hunter Biden laptop thing, which for me, from a news story perspective, right off the bat, I was like, this just doesn't seem right. There was a blind computer shop owner and something, and he went on the laptop and found this and that Hunter has code names and was paid this and that amount of money for. Now, what I looked up, just the brief stuff I looked up about it, was the truth that he was on the board of a large energy company in China, was it? Or Ukraine? Sorry, Ukraine.
Yeah, in the Ukraine.
I guess there was ties to China too somewhere in the murkiness.
Yeah.
But, so if we were to be charitable to let's say Hunter Biden's a bad guy, let's try to be charitable to that. Is it the worst thing we can find that he was appointed to a position based on his last name and perhaps his influence? But I think the true story was that Ukraine wanted to have a good standing with the West. So they were involved with the Russia-Ukraine stuff back then, and they didn't want to seem biased on to Russia or
Yeah, I think it's fairly obvious that you can't get away from people getting positions because of their family name or their connections, and this is just kind of the way the world works.
Yeah,
I mean, you look at Trump. He had his entire family around him in the White House.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
and I'm sure that the Trump name has been used extensively. Yeah, I'm not saying it's okay because Trump did it. I mean, I don't think it is okay. I think it would be ideal if that type of thing didn't happen. But that is the type of thing that happens for all politicians. Is this kind of they can use their associations and their connections to benefit those around them and benefit themselves in return. And that type of grift has been kind of going on for a long time, and it's certainly going on now with the majority of politicians, and even the ones you think that are completely independent, they still get speaking fees and things like that. So it's very difficult to remain like entirely without suspicion. But the Hunter Biden laptop, yeah, like you said, it was kind of weird the way it turned up. Like this, I don't think it was blind, but it was.
Very
He
fishy.
claimed he couldn't recognize the guy who brought it in, but the guy said he was Hunter Biden, which was kind of weird. And then he looked at the contents of the laptop, which kind of seems a bit like unethical, really. Like
Yeah.
he should have just wiped it clean if it was really something that somebody had left him. If you talk to other people in the porn industry, it doesn't mean the porn shops,
Pawn shops,
people
yeah.
who run pawn shops and things like that. If someone leaves a laptop or repair shops, it doesn't mean you own the contents of everything that's on that laptop just because someone left it there. You own the physical thing itself. But yeah, it was very kind of suspicious and possibly some kind of operation done by somebody trying to discredit him. And obviously the timing of it
Well, the timing
was suspicious.
the impeccable part. Yeah, the timing was the part that flashed red to me. And then also when they started to say, "Oh, look, the media is not covering this; they're trying to bury the story." I mean, what if it's just an uninteresting story? Like,
yeah, I think the media is a combination of things there. I think the media recognized that there were a lot of problems with the story about the validity of the story in itself, where the hard drive came from to start with, and then the things that were on the hard drive. Because it's kind of like a known disinformation tactic of the Russians. I'm not saying it was the Russians, but just for example, the Russians will kind of hide lies in a bunch of truth. So they could have at some point have got Hunter Biden's laptop or an image of it or whatever, and then just took the entire thing, which has got photos of him, smoking a crack pipe from back when he was addicted and things like that, which may not have been on the laptop. It may have been something that was from a long time ago. But he had addiction problems, and he was open about that. And he's not the one running for office. But then they will take that, and then they will insert little things in there. Like there might be emails between him and somebody else, and then they could just change a few words in the emails to make it sound a lot worse than it actually was. But we don't really know, because we don't really know what the validity of the stuff on the drive was. And I'm not sure if the Bidens have really made any comments about the drive itself. And so the press is just left with not knowing how genuine these things are, and they don't want to be accused of interfering with the election by putting out stuff that hasn't been actually vetted. And also, there probably is a degree of liberal bias there, because a lot of people in the press would prefer Biden to be president than Trump. And it may be, if the tables were turned a bit, it might not have been quite so good for whoever's laptop it was.
Yeah. So for the last few years, you've been discussing, debating some of these UFO enthusiasts online regarding the Navy videos. Was it Go Fast, and was it Gimbal? The other one's called
Go Fast, Gimbal, and Tic Tac, or FLIR 1. Yeah.
Now I've followed a little bit of it, but I haven't got too much into the weeds. Have you found any common ground in any of those discussions, or have you just been met with a cement wall at every turn?
Well, this the bottom line, like the way it's kind of all come out, is like there were these 3 videos that got released. These 3 infrared videos, mostly of little blobs in the distance doing what seems to be interesting things. And my focus is on analyzing these videos to try to figure out what these things were. But along with these videos, there are also various eyewitness accounts of things that happened, either on the ships that were the planes came from, or in one case, a pilot flew over at a different time and saw what he described as being a tic tac. Got my little iPhone case here, something that looks a bit like this, just a tic tac shape, a cigar shape. And so I focus on analyzing the videos, and there's 3 of them, and I go through each one, and I go look frame by frame, and I look at the numbers on the screen and do lots of analysis, and then I say what I think is going on in this video, and I give my reasons, and I say what I think is not going on in the video. I don't think it's defying gravity, or it's making sudden moves, or it's moving really fast, or whatever I think is not going on. And I think I've made a fairly good case for those videos. But then the common ground there is that everybody says, well, what about the eyewitness accounts? Why are you ignoring all these eyewitness accounts? And I'm not ignoring them. I do actually discuss the eyewitness accounts. But the problem is we don't have any eyewitness accounts of the videos. We just have the videos themselves, especially with the gimbal and go fast videos. We don't really have any good accounts. I think we've got like one secondhand account of some guy who said that he saw the video later or something like that, or he talked to the guy who was there. But with those 2 videos, all we have is the video itself. So I just focus on analyzing the video and say what's in the video. And a lot of people don't like that because they think that you should take the totality of the evidence. But that only really works if there's some kind of connection between the 2 parts of the evidence. If the guy says, I saw this rotating craft, and then you say, well, here's the video of that same rotating craft, then yeah, you can look at those 2 things together. But we didn't. We just said, we just have a video of what seems to be a rotating craft, and we have a guy saying, I saw this video of this rotating craft. So it's been an ongoing issue, is trying to kind of get through to the people who believe in UFOs as some kind of extraordinary phenomena, that all I'm doing is analyzing the videos, because the videos do in fact stand alone.
Right. I feel like because UFO sightings have become more almost normalized or accepted in the world, it brings out more claims. Like because I can't think of a specific example, but I know I've heard people, friends, and that over the years just randomly tell me a story. Yeah, I saw something, last summer I saw something at the beach and it was this and that and the light went fast. And I always feel like they're just sort of reciting details of maybe a previous UFO, description they might have heard. And I feel like they just sometimes people just want to
Yeah.
say something and be a part of something.
It's very difficult talking to people who have had a UFO sighting, or who think they've had a UFO sighting, because a lot of them genuinely believe that something special happened, and they get kind of defensive if you question whether was it actually special, or were you just having a bit of a brain fart, or some kind of optical illusion was going on, or you perhaps just saw a B-2 bomber or something like that. So it's I almost don't like to talk to people who just simply are giving you an eyewitness account of what happened, because it doesn't generally go anywhere, especially if it's something that happened years ago. Like there's what some guy on Facebook tells me about how I don't know, I can't remember what happened exactly. Like he stopped his car and there was a giant black triangle flew overhead and you could see it clearly, and it was the size of 2 football fields. And this is, he genuinely believes this is what happened. But then you see other accounts from history where people are describing the same event. They were together, they were standing next to each other, and they give descriptions of what they say was the same event. And one guy says, oh yeah, it was like this giant sphere that like hovered for a while, and the other guy said it was a triangle that was zipped by really quickly. And even though it was actually the same event, people have different perceptions of what was going on, or at least they have different memories of what happened when they're asked to talk about it later. And because like a group of people can have different perceptions of something within that group, then obviously when you have one individual and they're telling you one story, it doesn't mean that was the actual accurate story. If there'd been like a few people standing there watching the same thing, they may well have reported different things. His might have been the accurate one, but it also might have been the one that was wrong, or they might all have been wrong. Could have been some kind of optical illusion because you're all looking at the same thing. If there's an optical illusion type thing over there and you all look at it, you're all going to be subject to the same illusion.
Yeah, and there's and you've talked about this many times, but there's memory is not infallible. Our senses are not infallible. Like uh, this, we know this from psychology and all types of things. And also there are strange phenomenon like weather things and all kinds of stuff that optical illusions. There's the world is an interesting place that is full of interesting happenstances and phenomenon, but it doesn't always mean. And I think people always lean into this that whatever they see must mean usually UFOs, which usually it means aliens.
Yeah, and people also, like, when they see things for the first time, they sometimes have difficulty understanding what they're looking at. Like I moved house recently. This is a new background, it's a new house from the last time that we talked. And where I lived before, we wouldn't get very many flocks of migratory birds. Very rare to see. But where I've moved now, like it's like closer into Sacramento, I'm near a lake, and pretty much every day I get loads of birds flying overhead, and sometimes in giant V formations or giant double V formations, or sometimes I see these enormous like flocks of birds. All you can see is these little white specks in the sky just fly across in some kind of formation, sometimes in lines, sometimes in big swirling clouds. And if you hadn't seen that type of thing before, which I didn't because I just moved here, then you could very easily fall for the idea that it was something new. Like if you're just visiting somewhere and you see these white dots fly across the sky and you can't see the wings flapping because they're so high up, you just see bright white dots in the sunlight, you might think they're UFOs. And if you go onto the UFO reporting sites like MUFON and look through their database, you will find stuff that's obviously just flocks of birds. And it's because they've only seen it for the first time. And then you'll read the description, either there's no video or before you look at the video, you read the descriptions and they say things like a fleet of craft flew across the sky. And they'll say like the craft were as big as a plane, things like that. But it's just a flock of birds. So you get this disconnect, a known disconnect between verbal descriptions and what's actually there. So any verbal description could well be subject to that kind of disconnect, no matter how forcefully the person actually believes it.
Yeah. Another point of news recently is the COVID stimulus package, and that stipulated in there is that the government is going to release some sort of information on unidentified, whatever they call it now, UA. And of course, anytime these things come out in the news, like when the Navy sighting videos came out, or whether it might have been a year after they came out initially, New York Times had that article, and I think it was. And anytime there's a release in the media like this, it gets people who were sort of on the fence to go, "Oh, maybe there really is aliens. Like, let me look into this now." And so, what can you explain about the COVID stimulus and what's in there?
Well, it's not even like a legislation or anything like that. It was just kind of a committee comment, like a committee directive that got tacked on to something that became part of the COVID stimulus bill because they threw all these things in there. And what happened really is that Marco Rubio in Florida, he's a bit of a UFO enthusiast, and he's kind of like, because of that, kind of got behind this idea that there should be more reporting on UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, which is what the Navy calls them. And so he was supplied some language, which is what's in the comment there, by the To the Stars Academy. I can't remember the name of the guy now. The ex-government guy. There's an ex-government guy who works there.
The Pentagon guy used to work at the Pentagon, or
no, it's the other guy, the former assistant undersecretary of defense type thing. Can't remember his name. It doesn't really matter, but he wrote this language, gave it to Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is on this committee. He got it put into the committee comments as a directive, and then he gets into the thing, the bill. It doesn't really mean anything. It directs them to produce a report on the what's going on, but they can't produce a unclassified report that will be released to the public. So that there's going to be probably two things, maybe just one thing, but they're going to do things that are unclassified. So they're going to say, oh yeah, we're looking into airspace incursions at military bases and in fleet formation type things. And these are the steps that we're taking, and people are flying drones in, and sometimes planes fly in by accident, and blah blah blah. Just the usual type of thing. And then sometimes we get reports from pilots who can't identify what they're seeing, and so we're looking into better ways of resolving those situations, better training for the pilot, like what additional things need to be done, what might these cases have been in the past, and what causes a situation where the pilot can't identify things. So they'll produce a report like that. And then maybe there's some classified stuff as well, which they might do a classified bit of the report, which will be like, oh, and yeah, we have this secret platform of counter drone activities and killer drone swarms and stuff like that. But it's all classified, so they can't talk about it. But they're not going to say,
we found
we think they're aliens.
When Obama announced that he got Osama bin Laden, I was driving around at the time and I heard it on the news, and I remember I thought, because they just said he's going to come on and make an announcement. And I remember I thought it was going to be aliens.
It's never aliens.
Yeah,
but people who are UFO fans, and I'm a bit of a UFO fan myself. Science fiction person, especially when I was younger, and it would be really cool to discover alien life. It's like there's a distorted sense of it's about to happen. The disclosure is just around the corner, and that it's the most important thing that's ever happened in human history, which it kind of would be if we actually discovered alien life. Mm-hmm. We're not alone in the universe. That's pretty damn significant and would be amazing. There's this feeling that it's just there. It's just about to happen, and we've just got to get one more push. But no. It's not happening. There's nothing. There's no indication whatsoever that the aliens are visiting us. The Navy gives two hoots about these things because they've got real issues to worry about.
Yeah.
Airspace incursion is a real issue, but they don't think that it's aliens. The most they're going to think that perhaps the Russians and the Chinese have some fancy drones or something, but
which is a serious thing. I mean, the just geopolitics and that, and the concept of maybe another war. We need to pay attention to these things, and some of this.
We should be forward thinking on these things, because there's new weapons coming out all the time. Like the idea I just mentioned of drone swarms attacking people. You've already seen drones being used to try to assassinate political leaders.
Yeah,
there was one in South America like a year ago.
Netflix thing with it's called Spycraft. They go into all those different things, and some of it's incredible. I mean, and even the true things that we know about already, like the poisonings and that kind of thing, is it's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a drone swarm. I mean, I think there's a certain failure of imagination in terms of getting ready for these types of things, but if someone wanted to, it would be relatively easy to do some kind of drone swarm with drones with explosives on them and send them into buildings and things like that, or especially if there's an open air situation. But I'm sure that people are talking about this, and this would be the type of thing that would be classified. And so you're going to get a portion of this report, if it ever comes out, which we probably will, there'll be something that comes out. You're going to get a portion of the report that's classified, and it's going to contain things about how do we defend against drone swarms, and how do we defend against whatever other types of weapons are anticipated in the future. But because there's going to be this classified section, people are going to think, that's the bit about aliens. But it's not. It's just going to be something about advanced foreign weapons or whatever, or advanced defensive techniques.
Speaking again of COVID, the origins of the virus. Now, we have Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump. We had Donald Trump say, of course, throughout the last year, we're looking into it very strongly. We have evidence that suggests that it may have been created in a lab. You have the point that in Wuhan, there's a level 4 lab near where this is supposed to originate from. I had Dr. Kevin Folta on recently, and we talked about this, and we talked about how there's a lab in every city in China. He's been to the lab in Wuhan. He told me a bit about it. One of the points of evidence that they had brought forward was that they figured out that in November of 2019, the workers there had cold symptoms, like as if that is supposed to be some direct evidence that they got it while they were trying to create it and keep it locked down or whatever. The point that virologists have made, and there's a great Reddit thread. I may add the link again in the show notes for this episode, but where a virologist, PhD, goes into depth about why it's highly likely that it's not created by humans. Um, and basically they're just, when virologists look at the virus, they can just tell that if it was, it's not well made. Like there's a lot of errors in it, and if it were have been made by humans, they would have done a much better job. And
or maybe they would have covered their tracks. I don't know. It's
maybe, but this links to another bit of a ramble about the intellectual dark web and the Joe Rogan Experience and the Mr. Weinstein there, the evolutionary biologist. Who had suggested on Joe Rogan, that his evidence for why he thinks could be man-made and things like this. That I see a lot of those people, like we mentioned Joe Rogan, who has showcased you multiple times. He had his great show, Questions Everything, there, and it seemed like he was doing a lot of great work to showcase skeptics and debunking. And now it's kind of taking a turn for you. He's got a lot of UFO guys on lately. He's had this guy. I have his name here somewhere. The gentleman who wrote a book about, well, that guy for UFOs, but there's this other guy about COVID that says, masks don't work. And he wrote a book on all this, and he goes through the death numbers. And what do you think about these shifts a little bit there with these figures? And
well, that's a lot of topics.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but
the Joe Rogan thing, like I think he definitely is backslid a little bit. I think for a while he kind of got really interested in kind of debunking things because he recognized a few things that he'd got wrong before. He always talks about how he had this kind of wake up call about rod photography, which is where when an insect flies through the frame of a photograph in a long exposure, you get this kind of fancy looking rod, and he thought that they actually were like alien ethereal beings or something, and then he figured out they weren't, and so he talked about that. And then he figured out that chemtrails weren't real, like partly by reading my blog, and so he talked about that a lot as well. But then I think there's a bunch of stuff that he hasn't been willing to let go, like the UFO stuff, and it's kind of, in some ways, he's become perhaps a bit excessively open-minded, in that he's believing things without evidence more, because he's already primed, because he's believing people like Bob Lazar on the UFO nonsense. I'm specifically talking about Bob Lazar's UFO nonsense, not about anybody else's nonsense here. And so I think he perhaps is a bit more open to conspiracy theory type things. And then you get into things like the COVID stuff, like was it created in a lab or was it modified in a lab? Like were they researching something and it got out? It's kind of easy to ask, like, what if questions there, and just postulate that it might have happened, and then say that it probably did, and without really having to go through the evidence. It's like you put two and two together. There was a lab there, and this is an unusual virus, and so therefore, it was created in the lab. So I think he's kind of taking, in some ways, the path of least resistance, but he's also kind of got a bit swept up in this kind of constellation of different kind of people and theories, which kind of tends towards belief in things like the election fraud and COVID being faked. And I think in some ways he became a bit of a Trump supporter, even though he doesn't really like Trump, but he didn't really like Biden either. So
this is the thing, and this is like with Dave Rubin and these other guys that are part of this group, less so the Sam Harris's and that, but with Peterson and Rubin and all these guys have shifted to the right. They say that they're not right wing.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
They're classical liberals, but yet they because the things on the left have annoyed them so much, and I think they've hyper focused on Antifa and these types of things that
Hmm.
they get drawn towards but they can never commit to I'm a Trump supporter. It's always,
Right.
no, I don't
And
like
they're
either
probably
of them.
not in a personal level, but it's with Joe Rogan. I come back to him because in some ways the intellectual dark web kind of revolves around him because it was his kind of huge audience that
Yeah,
promoted these things. I mean, you look at Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson's thing was just basically that he was opposed to having to
the
uh,
pronouns and
use pronouns for his
yeah,
students. Whatever they chose, he was just going to refer to them as him or her, whether they liked it or not, or
which he
not
really
use
blew
them
that
at
out of
all.
proportion. Like, I mean, when I first heard him, I was like, okay, I understand. You shouldn't have to.
Yeah,
I'm a
yeah.
Canadian too, so this is in our neck of the woods, and yeah, we respect if you're trans and you have a pronoun. Yet, we do see that okay, you cannot force people to say certain things, but he made it seem like it was the end of the world, and
Indeed, yeah. And that's kind of like kind of an underpinning of the whole intellectual dark web type thing is this kind of like really strong opinion opposition to this kind of gender identity issues and also this thing called critical race theory, where critical race theory is just that kind of everything is kind of framed in the context of race because there's so much historical racism in this country and perhaps around the world, but specifically in America, which is true to a degree, obviously, because we have the whole slavery issue and the Civil War fought over ostensibly slavery, and this huge history of oppression and the civil rights movement and all that. So you can kind of see how things can be viewed in that framework, but then it gets presented by these people like this guy called James Lindsay, who
yeah,
was one of the co-authors of the book How to Have Impossible Conversations, which I followed him because of that book. But then I started seeing all he did was post about critical race theory and how it's destroying civilization, as if
I
this was
was
the biggest issue ever.
David Pakman, or no, I think it was Tim Heideck, or maybe I was listening to the comedian that they're liberal, left leaning guys too,
Mm-hmm.
but he just made a point that all these guys talk about the same thing over and over again, and
Yeah.
it's just boring. And it kind of made me think, you know what, that's true. Like 4 years ago, when this was all happening, these guys are showing you different points of view, yet now they're just 4 years banging the same drums. And at least there's guys like Sam Harris who are still exploring new topics and you know progressing the conversation rather than just getting stuck, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what they started to say they were doing, was they're talking about the real issues that the left doesn't want to talk about in that, but now it's recursive and
Well,
it's
it's almost a little bit like the UFO thing is that you get a pet subject that you think is really important, and then it becomes like so all encompassing, and you start to view the world through that perspective. So I think like James Lindsay is viewing the world through the perspective of civilization is being destroyed by critical race theory, when the vast majority of people have not heard of it and are not really affected by it. So it's this kind of weird perspective that it's
yeah. There is something to be said. I like John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry on this subject. They do they're the black guys at the bloggingheads.tv, and they have a great podcast where they talk about this stuff. And John McWhorter is writing a book right now on anti-racism and how it's similar to a cult or a religion.
right.
So there's something to be said there. Interesting conversation. But yes, it's for the most part, you're right. Like, people don't really know or think about those kind of things. And yeah, the intellectual dark web. I think Sam has revoked his pass. He said
Really?
I think he said, yeah, I'm not putting down
Well,
my
there's
membership.
also Michael Shermer in there, and
Yeah, and he's great. Obviously, he's one of the.
yeah, he's a libertarian, and I think he used to talk, I think, a lot more about kind of his libertarian ideas, and he would sometimes come out with things that everyone was going, "Oh, Michael," and they would like roll their eyes on Twitter about what he just said. But he seems to do that less and less now. I'm not sure if he's actually changed his position on things, but yeah, it was like he's a guy who does all this great skeptical work and everything, and then he's also in this strange intellectual dark web and is really worried about girls' sports in schools being taken over by transgender girls.
Yeah,
Things like that.
it's interesting time. Just to quote Joe Rogan, who often says that, but it is it really is, and I do wonder with all this stuff that we talk about, just the direction of social media and the economy now, and different things that are going on that are very strange, and no one quite knows the right answer. And it's you know, I can't imagine what the next 10, 20, 30 years is going to look like as far as the
Yeah,
landscape of this
no,
conversation.
it's fascinating. Yeah, you get things like this kind of intellectual dark web kind of cropping up. But how are things going to change over the next even like the next year or two? It's the fallout from the election has yet to really kind of start to rear its head, I think.
Yeah. Wrapping up, the last couple things I wanted to talk about was touch on this concept of the Great Reset,
Mm,
and also some Bill Gates stuff. Now, of course, this
sure.
all relates to COVID and everything else. Um, so, with this Great Reset, from what I know, my layman's understanding is that there is a thing called the Great Reset.
There
It's just a
is.
name for the economic approach after COVID-19 and how the world is supposedly, and it's not a mandate or a law either.
No.
It's a concept or a loose collection of concepts.
Yeah,
But now it's been co-opted in a sense, and I don't know which came first, but there's this sort of right-wing conspiracy that the New World Order, it's almost a new name for the New World Order, essentially.
yeah, or the purge. There was this thing called the purge where they were going to just get rid of the laws for a day and get rid of all the people. But yeah, it's like the New World Order. But basically, the Great Reset is, I think it's just essentially almost like it's just a website on the World Economic Forum's website, and it's this kind of collection of what do we do now type essays and suggestions for how how the world's going to recover from the hit of COVID. And there's this vast kind of shift in terms of unemployment and this vast movement to working at home and things like that, and then this need to prevent future pandemics as well. So they kind of like think, what should the world be like? And everyone's got their own opinions about what the world should be like. And the World Economic Forum isn't this monolithic body. It's hundreds, if not thousands of members who all have different ideas about what the world should be like. But we do know that COVID has created a big change, very obviously, like with what's gone on for the last like nearly a year now has been very significant in the way people conduct themselves in a variety of ways, like certainly things like working from home and homeschooling and things like that. So there has been a change whether you like it or not. So you could just say that COVID itself has been the Great Reset, and now we're just going to figure out what that actually entails. But then people are also saying, like, the world is changing. We've got to get in there and make sure it changes in the right direction. We've got to not let things just go downhill. We've got to try to get things onto a more stable basis. And it's not so much that we have the opportunity to do that; it's that there's a necessity to act now before things turn really bad.
Yeah,
So
for some
I don't
reason.
really think there's anything to it in terms of like a big conspiracy theory in the New World Order, because New World Order has always been a term that just refers to how the world is now.
Yeah.
The world after the Cold War was a New World Order. After the Berlin Wall fell, it was a New World Order. After we left Vietnam, it was a New World Order. So
Yes,
the
and
world is changing.
I just wonder why I had thought that the Great Reset was originally a term in the conspiracy world, and then coincidentally they named this thing the Great Reset, or is it that they named it the Reset and then the conspiracy guys took a hold of the name?
Yeah, I don't think it was a thing before. There were like things like the purge, and then there's other related things like Agenda 21 and Agenda 2050, which are similar kind of like blue sky think tank type things where people say what do we want the world to be like if we have to have a sustainable world, and then they write all these kind of wish list things, and then people like take them as being what the elite wants. It's like, you could take the Georgia Guidestones and say that's what the elite wants. Just because something is written down somewhere, even if it's written in stone, it doesn't mean that that's actually the law of the land.
Right. It also makes me think about when they say, that leaders are power hungry and they're just trying to consolidate more power, and isn't that such a bad thing? And I just always think, um, and this relates to Bill Gates buying all this agricultural land now and being the largest landowner. Anyone who's rich is going to buy assets, and anyone who
Hmm.
has power is going to want to consolidate and maintain that power. It's like when you have a job, you want to keep getting promoted and advanced in your job. Like back to the beginning, we were talking about people getting speaking fees and that kind of thing. It's like people just want, when your politician has done their reign, they're to go to a farmland and just like till the soil for the rest of their lives in retirement. Like they're not allowed to, write
Yeah.
a book or get any sort of money or speaking fees. And I just think that a lot of this stuff is attributing nefarious
Yeah.
to these things, but they're just how the world works.
And with Bill Gates, especially, I mean, the stuff Bill Gates is doing is great. I mean, he's really pushing like global health and global vaccinations and changes for sustainability. And to say that it's part of some evil plan is kind of ridiculous. I mean, he's I think the second richest person, maybe the third richest now, but still, he's got tens of billions of dollars, and he's spending tens of billions of dollars on good work. But if you've got the idea that vaccinations are evil, then unfortunately that just means you have no choice but to assume that Bill Gates is evil, and then you've got to go from there and say, why would he be trying to poison everybody with vaccines? And you've got to make up this whole complicated fairy tale of a conspiracy theory to explain why he would be doing that, when really the reality is that he's just very much in favor of improving healthcare and health outcomes in other countries. Like he did a lot against malaria, things like that, and
He's just
I
a
think
good. He
helped.
just happens to be a good person. Would you believe that? Like
Yeah, I mean, he's just like, he's a Silicon Valley nerd essentially, and
he's one
it's
of my
just like,
heroes. Like since I was a
yeah.
kid, honestly. And me and my grandmother have this great. We talk about this a lot because, and she does listen to these shows. So hi, grandma. She is. We always talk about Bill Gates because, like for example, she got a video shared to her by an old lady, another lady at her
Hmm.
church, and it was this hoax video from 2011 of Bill Gates giving a talk to the CIA or
Yeah,
something. And if you look at the video, it's not even Bill Gates; it's
yeah,
some other guy.
yeah. That was
Uh,
the Funvax conspiracy theory, which I wrote about years ago. And
okay.
the idea was that there was a vaccine against spiritualism. So there
Right.
was
Yep.
Bill Gates had invented this vaccine, and it would stop people from believing in God, which
Yeah.
is completely baseless science, really. Like there's
Why would it have to be a vaccine? Why couldn't it just be like a pill?
well, that people don't really understand what vaccines are, so they
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
vaccines carry DNA altering molecules and nanorobots and things like that. So the whole thing was quite ridiculous. But like most good conspiracy theories, it's based on like a tiny sliver of truth. Like there was a book called The God Gene that some guy wrote, where he said there was like parts of the genetic code that contributed towards spirituality. But the title of the book was misleading, as he actually said in the introduction, in that there wasn't just one gene, there was like hundreds of different bits of the genetic code which all had impacts on that, and it was mostly not to do with genetics, it was to do with your upbringing. So it's not like you could just spray something in the air and everyone stops believing in God. It was complete nonsense.
Yeah, it's kind of disheartening sometimes where you see a Bill Gates article or a tweet or whatever it is, and then you just know when you scroll down the comments you're going to see. And every time I scroll
Yeah,
down, I'm
yeah.
correct. And this one page was some sort of psychedelic art page or something I used to follow, and it's slowly over the years turned into more political things and whatnot. And they just shared that article that he now is the largest landowner, farmland owner in America. And of course, the comments are things like, he's not human. We're all doomed. Why did we let him buy our land? And I'm like,
Yeah, well, I mean, there's loads of people who are far more evil than Bill Gates, who own lots of land. Like there's the guy who used to run Enron, the one who got away with it, who cashed out uh, before they got caught. He's the largest landowner in Hawaii, and he just basically used all the money he stole from Californian electric people who
yeah,
pay for electricity, and use it to buy lots of land. What's his name? The guy who runs Oracle has huge amounts of land. Ted Turner
Ted
had
Turner.
loads of
Yeah.
land. Yeah, and
I'm
they
sure.
rich people buy land. It's one of the things that they do.
Yeah.
And if you got lots of money, you're going to buy lots of land. And I think if you look into it, you'll probably find that a lot of the land he's buying is for conservancy.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, that's exactly what it is, and that's very obvious to anyone who really looks into Bill and Melinda Gates, their foundation, and that kind of thing. It's basically the moral of the story with all this stuff. Just don't just believe what you just, a headline or a picture or a video. Just maybe read a half of a book or a whole book on the subject, and usually.
Well, let's look into a bit more detail and look at the other explanations. Like people talk about how Bill Gates said he was going to reduce the world's population with vaccines. And they think that's literally what he said, but he didn't say that. He said that he's going to reduce the rate of population growth with things like improved healthcare and vaccines. And then you think, how does that work? And it works because when you have stable healthcare in a country, women have fewer children.
Yeah, people don't understand that in Africa, third world countries, and that if they don't have contraception or different access to healthcare and all kinds of things like that, they have too many kids, and then they can't take care of them, and some of them die, and that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and they have multiple kids in part because some of them die. Like they know that if a child only has like a 1 in 3 chance of getting to the age of 6, then you're going to have more children. And developed countries have a replacement rate of about 2, and other countries are having replacement rates of about like 3 or 4 or 5. And the better the healthcare system is, then the more stable the population growth rate is. But people take this very, very simple thing that vaccines are part of reducing the population growth rate, and then they twist it round and it becomes vaccines kill people to reduce the population. But people have got to look at more than just that simple interpretation of what's going on. Like, at least look at the other interpretations, and you'll find that these are the actual real interpretations. It's not an interpretation. This is what it actually is. But don't just stop thinking once you hear one explanation. Keep thinking.
And to my grandmother's credit, she now generally asks me every time somebody sends her a crazy link. She says, "What is this about?" And then I'm happy to check into something for her and let her know. And there you go. So Mick, thanks again for your time today. Everybody, if you want to follow Mick, it's Mick West, I believe, on Twitter. Podcast is Tales from the Rabbit Hole. You got a lot of cool episodes lately of different people you've met through Metabunk and others that explaining their stories with conspiracy beliefs and how they got out of them, different things like that. And of course, your book too is still available, Escape from the Rabbit Hole. Anything else anywhere else people can find you? Or
well, I'm Mick West pretty much everywhere. So if you just search for that on whatever the platform is, I usually crop up.
And any calls from Rogan lately? You think you could get back on there and straighten things out?
No, I'm kind of hoping he'll have me on to talk about UFOs at some point. He does mention me occasionally. He's saying, well, what about Mick West? He's very dismissive. He thinks I go through mental gymnastics, which I don't think is a bad thing. If you're doing mental gymnastics, that means you're actually trying really hard to think.
Well, here's to hoping, some sort of conference podcast you guys can have with maybe Bob Lazar can come on. I don't know. That's that too extreme, but somebody.
I am actually doing a podcast in next week, I think, with a guy where we're going to talk about Bob Lazar.
Perfect.
That should be interesting.
Well, hey, Mick, thanks again, and all the best, man. We'll talk to you soon.